Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by a very special guest, Luke Burgis. Luke is author of the book Wanting. Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Erik. I'm a big fan of what you're doing.
Thanks, Luke. So let's start out with why this book? Why don't you tell the story of how you came to write Wanting, and then let's get into some of the ideas therein.
Sounds good. Yeah. So there's a few different reasons why I wrote the book. And so I'm going to explain them because I think they'll set us up pretty well for the rest of our conversation, right? They get into some of the ideas themselves. So the first reason I wrote the book is because it's just the book that I wanted to read, which I think is the best reason to write a book. There's a lot of different books out there. There's a big corpus of knowledge in Girard circles. People have been writing about mimetic theory for decades. Really smart people, right? So in a certain sense, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants when I'm doing this, and I don't have time to name them all on this call. Yet, anytime somebody has asked me for an intro to mimetic theory, I really struggle with what book to recommend for them. Like something that touches on popular culture, something that's really easy to read, like 8th, 9th grade level. You know, that touches on entrepreneurship, some of the current events in the world. And I just really struggled to find that book to recommend to people. So I finally decided that I kind of had this unique background and skill set where maybe it had to be me. And I wanted to give his thought a bigger audience, make it more accessible. So at a certain point, I went to a cover conference where all the Girard scholars meet up in Austria. And it was at that point I realized that I basically have to write this book. You know, there's an old Latin saying, quid recipiter ad modum recipientes recipiter, which basically means, whatever is received according to the mode of the receiver, right? And for a lot of people, they're not going to receive anything. They're not going to get anything out of these super sort of academic books. So I just saw a gap. So that's the second reason is really there was this gap in the market. And I felt like, Girard wasn't getting a fair shake, right? People in other parts of the world aren't familiar with them because they just have it's hard to grasp these concepts when you're like an intelligent native English speaker. Girard is hard to read and fairly obscure. Imagine, if it wasn't your first language or something, this hasn't been translated in a lot of other languages. So, there's a gap in the market for a book like this. I also felt like, and this is just my personal opinion, not everybody shares this, but I think there's a bit too much of a focus in mimetic theory and in people that are interested in Girard on violence. And I talked to Peter Thiel about this when I talked to him for the book, and he sort of agreed with me on that point. So there's a bit too much of an emphasis on violence, and I think on religion too, to be honest with you. It's hard to talk about Girard without getting into a little theology. I like theology. One of my degrees is in theology, so I can certainly talk about it. But I caution people to go straight there. For one thing, I think it alienates a lot of people, or at least causes them to kind of close up a little bit if the very first thing you start talking about are the Gospels. Girard himself said that, really his theory was working out of the Gospels and everything was already there. They're important books to read. I would say if you haven't read the Gospels yet, stop reading whatever you're reading and read the Gospels, or do yourself a big favor. They're like one of the foundational texts in history about the greatest event, or the most important event, at least in history. Yet I think that can really trip people up. For one thing, the scapegoat mechanism and the sort of this metaphysical religious approach to Girard, it's very complicated. The theory is complex, and the scapegoat mechanism is the most complex, sophisticated, hardest part of mimetic theory to understand. So in my opinion, you don't even want to start talking about that until you spend a lot of time just unpacking mimetic desire, which is like the root of the whole thing, right? And there's most of my book is about mimetic desire. I have a chapter on the scapegoat mechanism, as you know, but I think you really have to spend a lot of time developing mimetic desire, because that's something that is accessible through basic phenomena that we experience in our own lives every day, especially as entrepreneurs. I'm sure you and I have a lot in common with that. Mm-hmm. And that's the last reason I wrote it, was really because, I felt mimetic theory at an existential level through my own journey of being a startup founder, having, the roller coaster ride that most other people that have been in that world can relate to.
Yeah. Let's set the table here. Let's unpack mimetic desire and what underneath that idea, what was really the core contribution that didn't exist? Because someone might, not have a huge understanding of Girard and might say, is it simply, we want what other people want because they want it? How would you sort of unpack mimetic desire and what is sort of, nuanced or so, game changing about it?
Yeah, I think that definition you just gave is a good one. For me, mimetic desire is an understanding of just how pervasive imitation is among humans, right? Most creatures imitate. Aristotle said 2,400 years ago that humans are by far the most imitative creatures in the universe. And that was true then, and it's true now. But what Aristotle didn't put his finger on, Plato didn't put his finger on either, was this deeper level of imitation. So it's not imitation of representation like art. Plato talked a lot about that, and speech and ways of dressing and music that your friend listens to or anything like that. There's a deeper level of imitation that goes right down to the imitation of desire itself. So we want what other people want because they want it. So it's not we just want it because they already have it. There's a deeper level, which Girard calls metaphysical desire, and that's that we actually desire their desire, right? And if you take that far enough, we sort of desire to be more like them. So imitation is a good and positive thing. It's like how we learn. It's the basis of education. We wouldn't know language without imitation. Dr. Andy Meltzoff at the University of Washington has done these fascinating studies on like the imitation in babies. So it's really good that we have it. Girard used the word mimesis, and he spoke of mimetic desire instead of, say, imitative desire, for a couple of reasons. Mimesis is more of a technical word. It comes from the Greek. But I think it's very useful to distinguish mimesis from imitation. And Girard, when he used the word mimesis, 95% of the time he was speaking about something negative. So, when babies imitate, they imitate very openly. They imitate their mother super openly. They're proud of their imitation. We talk about role models for children. But something really funny happens as we grow up, right? Like our imitation goes underground. And so it happens in a secret, hidden way. Well, we're kind of embarrassed of it. Like we before and after the French Revolution is really, it's a game changer in history. Like if you look before the French Revolution, imitation was like prized, like imitating like the masters was prized, and innovation was looked upon with suspicion. Like if you were an innovator, like Hobbes has written about this, if you were an innovator before the French Revolution, you were like a heretic and you were disrupting the order and you were not being respectful to your ancestors and things like that. After that, everything changed. And now we kind of live in a world where innovation is our God, and like nobody wants to be known as an imitator. I don't really know very many entrepreneurs that like talk about how well they imitate, right? So, it's mimesis. They're still imitating, but they're just doing it in the form of mimesis.
Well, first, can you describe what changed such that the high status thing, used to be, imitating, and now is invented? Like, what changed such that became reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. It's a very complex question, and we could get into history and politics with this, and we can go down that road if we need to. There was just a general overturning of the existing hierarchies. So we used to live in a much more hierarchical world, and there was a rebellion against that, right? We could even maybe call that a mimetic rivalry, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later in the podcast. So there was an overthrowing of those traditional hierarchies, and before which imitation was respected and done a little bit more openly. For you imitated the saints, for instance. They're great external mediators, and I think as the culture became more secular, we entered into a world where those kind of stable hierarchies were overturned. And we live in now kind of a liquid modernity where we don't have that stable hierarchy. Sort of everybody's kind of imitating everybody. I mean, we still live in a hierarchical society. There's no doubt about that, but nothing like it used to be. And now that we're all it's a bit more egalitarian, sort of like nobody can really speak openly about imitating anybody because like we're all competing with each other in this weird way, and social media probably exacerbated that. Like, since you read the book, or most of it at least, I refer to this kind of new state that we're in as like freshmanistan, because it's almost like we're all freshmen again, right? Remember what freshman in college was like? I sure do. And it's like everybody's kind of trying to figure out who they are. Everybody's trying to be unique. Nobody wants to, be seen as imitating anybody else.
And to that end, why don't you unpack mimetic rivalry just to get our terms out here and why that's an important concept to understand?
Sure. So if the root of mimetic theory is mimetic desire, meaning we don't generate our own desires out of this sort of secret desire chamber that we all have inside of our bodies. We don't have like this organ of desire that generates them ex nihilo out of nothing. Desires are generated through mimesis. They're generated through other people. Now, I should make a distinction for all of our the listeners that aren't familiar with this concept. Many people are like, well, what does that mean? Like, I didn't like imitate anybody to like have my coffee this morning. That's not really what we're talking about. I would argue that there's probably some mimesis involved in that too, in terms of the brand of coffee that you drink and the way that you like it and everything. But those are biological needs for the most part. So I would, grant that there's not a lot of mimesis involved in that. When we're talking about mimesis, we're really talking about non-instinctual desire, right? So like more abstract things. Like the more abstract the object, the more mimesis is usually involved. So we're generating our desires through imitation by imitating other people. That means that we're imitating that person's desire for the same object that they want. So we have like de facto made ourselves, in a sense, a rival of that person that we're imitating, if we take that far enough. Okay. Now, a very important distinction to make is like how close that person we're imitating is to us. So if that person is dead, or they're separated by like a huge amount of social status, we can imitate them relatively safely. Because, like I can't seriously compete with Elon Musk as an entrepreneur, right? He doesn't even know who I am. And he's like lives literally in a different social world than I live in. So in that case, like imitation is no problem. But if I'm imitating like the other entrepreneur who's in my accelerator program or something like that, that can become a little bit dangerous because we like work together every day in the same building. Maybe not now because we're talking during COVID, but we're like very much alike. And the more alike we are, and the closer that we are, not just physically, but like existentially and socially, the more dangerous it becomes because we might start competing over the same objects. Like he's featured in some like top 25 under 25 list, and I wasn't. And we start competing for that. And then I start resenting him and wondering, how I can like undermine him. Like every time he starts talking about his valuation, I start worrying about mine. And that can lead to serious rivalry. So I'll stop there because we could talk a lot more about that, I'm sure.
And what do you think is the biggest misunderstood point there in terms of, what people don't quite appreciate when understanding some of the things that we're talking about?
I think the biggest point that's not understood is the distinction between what Girard calls external mediators of desire and internal mediators of desire. So the external mediator of desire is like Elon Musk to me in a different world, right? There's no possibility of competition. That's the easiest definition of the world of external mediators. So I like to call that world Celebristan for short. I just think it's easy to remember, the world of celebrities. And I don't mean only celebrities, okay? I mean like a big brother can like appear to be in Celebristan to a much younger brother, but there's no serious competition between them for girlfriends or whatever. The world of internal mediators they're called internal mediators because they're sort of internal to your world. And that's where mimetic desire has a lot of negative effects, right? That's where rivalry happens. Not so much in what I call Celebristan, but in this world of internal mediators that I like to call freshmanistan, because the what it's like to be a freshman in high school or college is very much like that, right? We're all on the same page. Like as different as the freshmen think that they are. They're all the same age, like mostly none of them have any money. They're all trying to figure things out. They're like very, very similar, and they're all internal mediators to one another. So that's the most important distinction to make. And I think it's one of the ones that people learning about mimetic desire don't really understand. And I think it's the distinction that kind of makes it all click. And people can move between those two worlds. You can have like a PhD advisor to somebody getting their doctorate degree who's like in Celebristan, right? There's no possibility of competing with this like famous economist. But as soon as that student gets his PhD or her PhD and starts publishing and becoming known, and all of a sudden they're talking to Tyler Cowen and on his podcast, all of a sudden they're in the same world. So they've just moved from being external mediators to being internal mediators.
Now, how does this all relate to entrepreneurship?
I think that it has so much to do with entrepreneurship, and it's fun talking to you about this. And I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts. I mean, because you operate in the space, right, Erik, with Village Global and Beyond Deck. So I think that more than ever, especially with social media, like everybody seems to be an entrepreneur these days, right? Even journalists are becoming entrepreneurs with Substack. Like everybody's doing their own thing. Everybody has to be an entrepreneur in some sense as they like detach from traditional institutions in the New York Times or whatever. People work at Google and Facebook and they leave to start their own companies. That's like what you want to do. So, but more than ever, we all sort of like live in the world of internal mediators. Like we all sort of like know what everybody else is doing. It's publicized. We have like Shark Tank style competitions. It's much of it has become very performative, which it makes me wonder, like, we're losing sight of like what the market thinks, and not what like some judge in a competition thinks. And it's become, in my opinion, there's a lot of hidden and underground rivalry. I teach entrepreneurship at a business school part-time. I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs. And if you really go deep enough with a lot of them, they have like a lot of angst and anxiety. And my diagnosis most of the time is that, I mean, we could talk about like mental health with entrepreneurs all day long because it's a problem. But part of that is them probably not realizing the way that mimetic desire is driving them, the way that that rivalry is operative in their lives, the way that they're constantly looking to their left and their right to see what everybody else is doing. And that can really get them off track. And I want to be clear. I think community is a really important thing. I think, what you're doing is a game changer in education and lifelong learning. I mean, I wish I had something like that when I was an undergrad and after I graduated. People transitioning between jobs, the community is valuable. I think that we have to be mindful of the mimetic dynamics inside of communities and probably take steps. I'm not a fan of like the top-down approaches to managing mimesis, but I think people need to be aware so they can manage it better in their own lives.
And what does that look like? How can the leaders in communities, transform mimetic desire into something positive?
I think there are certain things that leaders can do. Peter Thiel has shared, the story about how he kind of managed mimesis. So Peter Thiel is a very, he was Girard's student and is probably the most well-known Girardian out there. I like Peter, but he's sort of got a monopoly on Girard's thought, right? But one of the things that he shared with me, and I think it's actually in 0 to 1, is that, he used to give people clearly defined tasks so that they weren't competing for abstract things like status and prestige. So he always gave them very clearly defined objectives that he could measure them against rather than measure them against each other. And companies do that all the time. I mean, I think one of the most toxic things that companies do is like chop the lowest 10% of the company, because talk about encouraging mimesis, right? Because like now the only thing that you care about is not being in the bottom 10%. So you've taken other people as your sort of like measure of value. And so have the managers. Super toxic, not to mention it's partly the scapegoat mechanism, right? Like we purge the problem. Sports teams do that all the time, right? The Knicks have a bad season, fire the coach, right? That hasn't really worked out so well for them. But on a personal level, which I'm more interested in kind of the personal level, I think you have to become aware of it. And it's not easy really to become aware of it. I mean, most people that have heard of Girard and read about him, they're like, oh shit, like this is real. Like this exists. I get it. Like I'm seeing mimesis everywhere now. Right. And then, maybe 2 or 3 years later, they have their holy shit moment. And the holy shit moment is the moment when they see it in themselves. It's the moment where like it's had a chance to percolate through and they've like experienced that at an existential level, and they maybe see themselves getting caught up in it, and then they have to extract themselves from it. And that's just hard work. I mean, it takes some humility. It takes some contrition. It takes some serious like self introspection, which I don't know if we have that in great supply these days. So I talk about 15 separate tactics in the book, like just understanding like who your models are, positive and negative, who you're, external, internal, being mindful of what kind of news you consume. All of those things, right? And I don't just mean like the mass media. I mean news about other people.
Simon Sinek believes leaders should always start with why, but you think it's better to lead with desire. Unpack that.
Sure. I think the heart knows things that the mind can't know. And great leaders appeal to transcendent things, transcendent possibilities, and they tap into that human capacity for wonder and awe. And those are desires that really transcend all explanation. We live in my opinion, in a fairly hyper-rationalistic world. And I think that people are wanting things. People are desiring long before they have any kind of reason to explain why. Falling in love often works like this, right? So in my opinion, desire comes first. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince, wrote a beautiful line that I think sums up this kind of approach. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, don't assign them tasks and work, but teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. So that doesn't happen necessarily through TED Talks or PowerPoints or carefully crafted mission statements and stuff like that. It happens from standing on the beach. It happens from looking out over the ocean and longing, or looking up at Mars and, wishing we could go there. So there's like a part of the human spirit that I don't think we capture very well with some of this more rationalistic approach. So I like Simon Sinek and I use start with why. In fact, I have my students watch that video and we talk about it. But I think there's another layer here, and mimetic desire has it's like a complementary piece. That's the way that I would put it. It's like the missing piece to that whole discussion.
Yeah. And how do we make sense of sort of mimetic desire, like as it relates to like status and social capital? Like how do we sort of reconcile these ideas, or how do they intersect with each other?
Yeah, that's a really great and complex question. You're in the education space, Erik. So I have like this running joke with some of my friends, like, what's education going to look like, and what are the Ivy Leagues going to look like 10 years from now? And sometimes I honestly wonder if you're going to have a kid who gets into Harvard or Stanford, and their strategy is to post their acceptance letter on Instagram, like capture all the mimetic value that may or may not bring them from that, and then decline the invitation and go join Be on Deck and save themselves like a couple $100,000, right? So there's this like sort of like debundling process that we're kind of going through, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to shift things, but people play with mimetic value all the time. And I don't think we really recognize like mimetic value is real. I mean, I think it's super active in the stock market right now. I'm happy to give you more of the philosophical underpinnings of this too, because I think there's a lot there. But that's what I would say, that I think people are playing mimetic games with status, and they always have.
Let's get into some of the philosophical underpinnings.
So I kind of cut my teeth. I studied philosophy after business school. So I did it a weird way. I did it the other way around. And a couple of huge influences on me were Max Scheler and Dietrich von Hildebrand. And they're both in the same line. They're both phenomenologists. And both of them, is sort of most fully articulated in von Hildebrand, had what they would call a value response theory of ethics. Okay. And that's, I'm really, really simplifying here, maybe oversimplifying. I know I run that risk, but in short, it's the idea that human beings can sense values in the world, not like all of them, right? Like some of our sense to values needs to be formed through like the pursuit of truth and through a good education and through wonder and things like that. So when we see a value in the world, our response to that value, whether we either respond to that value or not, okay, and the gap between the value itself, like the objective value itself, and our response to that value is probably represents like some kind of like a gap or a lack or a weakness in our personal development and our personality. Okay, so let me just give you two simple examples. I mean, there are moral values, there are aesthetic values, there are economic values, right? There's all different kinds of values. So if we take the moral value, we say that somebody was walking down the street and he saw somebody drowning in a lake, and he could very easily help them, and he doesn't help them. He's not responding to some basic value there. We'd say like pretty much anybody would agree there's something wrong with that person, right? And so what's the value there? Well, it's like human dignity. It's the value of human life, right? Which human dignity is kind of the foundation of most morality. But we would pretty much all agree that there was a value there that was worth taking a few minutes out of his day and maybe getting his suit wet to jump in the water and help that person. Okay. That's easy. I think like where value response gets more interesting is in like aesthetics. Like, I've taken a person into a beautiful Gothic church in Europe. And it was like the first time this person like ever stepped foot inside of a church in their life. And they were like totally like chewing gum and like zero response. Okay. Like zero. And it happened to be like really beautiful music playing at the same time. And it was just like, yeah, that's cool. Like, let's go on to the next thing. And I remember thinking like, yeah, there's something a little bit off about the response to that, like that level of beauty, right? Because that's an aesthetic value. And by the way, for anybody listening, like that's one of the things that I feel like you watch enough porn, that's one of the things that happens to you, right? Because you're so used to responding to like crude values that you begin to lose the ability to respond to other values, right? Like more transcendental values, to real beauty, right? So the real tragedy in that situation is that one day you're standing in front of a sunset and it doesn't do anything to you, right? You're just like totally numb. So I'm getting a little bit sidetracked with that discussion, but the reason why I think that value response theory is so fascinating and relates to mimetic theory is that, Shaler and von Hildebrand sort of believe that there are these objective values that one can or cannot respond to in adequate measure. Okay. Mimetic theory is kind of the idea that, most people are not responding to objective values at all. The number one value that they are responding to is mimetic value. In other words, they're just like responding to the status of another person's desire. So they've kind of went from a vertical response to objective values to a horizontal response. It's kind of a roundabout way of trying to get at a point. But I think that mimetic value is like rampant in our world. And I'm sort of struggling through. I don't have a clear answer, but something tells me that there's something important to be made in this sort of distinction, right? In understanding mimetic value and objective value and how those things can get out of whack, whether we're talking about in the stock market or whatever. Mimetic value seems to be dominant right now.
It's really interesting because the internet and technology seems to make mimetic value much more legible and explicit in a way that it could sort of unbundle when you talk about cars or houses or paintings or I don't know whatever. They were sort of bundled with plausible deniability that there's actual utility there, but really you're paying for some mimetic value in certain cases among certainly luxury goods. And it's interesting because like now, especially with NFTs and sort of crypto products, like what's more valuable, a painting itself or sort of the knowledge of its provenance and who else owned it and how rare it is, and it seems for many people actually the latter is more like does more signaling than the painting itself, which might as well just be sort of like extra. And so I think we're sort of unbundling what makes great signals, and the internet is sort of recombining them in new ways, in ways that like new forms of mimetic value. And you mentioned sort of, or alluded to sort of GameStop and the stock market stuff, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's happening in education too. I mean, education in a sense is being unbundled, but also like rebundled in certain ways. and then it might get unbundled again and repackaged. I mean, it's certainly something that's getting disrupted, and we're seeing different sources of value signals. And mimetic value, I mean, it's not all bad. I mean, I think we all kind of like use them and we all respond to them. So I'm not, suggesting, and I'm certainly not above it. I consider myself a pretty mimetic person, so we see it in art, but we certainly see it in education. I think one of the interesting things, like, what the Teal Fellowship did, once a couple of brilliant people got it and dropped out of college, there were now models for that. Right. Yeah. So the first one is always the hardest one, right? You just need to get the first whatever. And it's, the second and the third are like exponentially easier because now somebody's signaling value.
Yeah, totally. And so just to like speculate, like how do we foresee sort of even in the past 6 months, I mean, or 3 months, like a lot has happened around mimetic value. Like, how do you see that evolving or changing as the internet or technology continues to progress? Is it going to become more and more salient and important? And if so, what could that look like?
Yeah, I don't know is the short answer. I have absolutely like no idea. I have some ideas and they're in the book. So I'll probably reserve from speaking too much about them right now. I mean, one of the ideas that I sort of allude to is it possible that there's going to be sort of a technology or something like that that will mitigate the negative effects of mimetic desire, right? Like something that can diffuse it. I think you can make a strong case that social media, this is kind of a paradox, right? It's really weird that social media probably simultaneously diffused mimetic desire in many ways. Because if you think about it, like if you lived in a little town in one little high school, you could have serious like rivalries with like one or two other kids in that high school to be valedictorian or whatever. And that could get out of control, right? Like that could end up like blowing up and getting super weird. But now like your models are like not just the kids in your high school. Your models are like kids from all over the world because you see them talking about what they're doing on social media. So in that sense, like it's diffusing the little rivalries that can creep up in Freshmanistan. On the other hand, we all know that social media exacerbates and fuels mimetic rivalry at the same time because like now you've got more models and there's like more mimesis going on. And I mean, you could get into a rivalry with somebody who posts beautiful Instagram photos who lives on the other side of the world, who happens to be your same age or something. So it's ambiguous. Girard was very much like that. Like he sort of saw both sides of everything. Like he saw like mimesis is good and bad. It's good and evil, just like we all are. Like all of us are both good and bad. Like we're just this mix. So a lot of people aren't comfortable, I think, making sort of some of the like seeing that as part of, I think, our political problems today, right? Like everything's got to be black and white, but everything's not black and white.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. An idea I'm connecting in my head is this idea that, vulnerability has gotten more popular in recent years, or just sort of like, sharing your failures, sharing your struggles. And I wonder if some implicit reason for why that's become more popular is because we are in these mimetic games with each other and always seeing each other's highlight reels and we sort of difficult to escape. The more that we see their low light reels, the better we feel about ourselves. And so maybe that's sort of a subconscious element as to why the idea of sharing your failures is so popular.
Yeah, that's actually a really fascinating point, Erik. And it's funny only in the sense that like we can like become in a mimetic rivalry for sharing our low reels. You know what I mean? Like we can get into mimetic rivalries for like almost anything.
Yeah.
Like we can compete to be like more humble than another person, right? Like the irony of that. I think the way that Girard would put it is that mimesis, even if it starts off like in a kind of a healthy way, like, oh, I'm inspired by this person, or that's a good idea, let me do that too. If you give it enough time, it almost always, and the people are close enough, it sort of almost always turns into kind of the mimetic game. Yeah.
And so, you hear this response of like, okay, don't compete, find something for which you're the only one who does what you do. not instead of focusing on the rat race tournament style that Thiel talks about. And the question there is like, yeah, but are 8 billion people going to find 8 billion niches, or how do you sort of see that? Like, can no one compete? Is that the solution? Like, does that scale? Does that work?
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be one of the difficulties with the way that we're sort of moving, right? I sort of see that everybody has to be like their own brand and their own persona, and I wonder, like, I mean, everybody's unique and unrepeatable human being, okay? But I'm talking on the business level, right? Like, are we all like going to just move to a world where like everybody is like, has like an LLC after their name and has this brand and persona? I mean, I think it's going to make a lot of people miserable. I'm not sure if like just like mass like UBI is the answer. I don't really know exactly where we're going with that, but I do sense there's a real kind of like shift underway, there's this idea of like competition is also ambiguous, right? I'm not one of these people that's like competition is always good, right? If there's no competition, it's not valuable. That's a funny kind of mimetic. We could have a mimetic riff on just that, but competition it's also not bad, right? You got Peter Thiel. It's like, competition, like build a monopoly, right? Competition is both. There's good competition and bad competition. And really the key is knowing like when to compete and when not to compete. It's really that simple. And there's some people you're in a competition with, and at a certain point you need to opt out of that competition, because if you take it far enough, there's literally no end to it. So I think there's a lot of confusion about like the nature of competition itself. And, you have like the hardcore, like laissez-faire kind of people, like competition is everything. And then you have, the other side on the far left, it's like, competition is like a bad thing. I mean, there's definitely a middle ground here. And I just see people taking that to two extremes.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the LLC thing, and we were talking earlier about, entrepreneurship. And so it sort of asked like, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And that sort of segues into just a broader, philosophical conversation about being in general that I know you're interested in.
Yeah, Girard said that all desire is at root really, really metaphysical desire. So it's a desire for being. So I don't know about you, Erik. I mean, I'm fascinated by the idea of like people wanting to be entrepreneurs. I think that's a good and noble thing. I wonder, like, how does that happen? Like, what's the process by which that happened? It seems to me like, at least in my experience, there's a problem in the world, and the best way to solve that problem happens to be starting a company, right? There are other ways to solve problems other than starting a company. Like, you start a company because you believe you can create value, right, for all the stakeholders and make a profit. There are other ways to solve problems. I mean, it might be like political action. It could be like writing a book. There's a lot of ways to solve problems. Some problems are just best solved through starting a company, and a lot of the best entrepreneurs I know, like that's the way that it works. So in other words, it's not like this abstract idea of like acquiring some like being of an entrepreneur. And therefore you're an entrepreneur and you go around starting companies, like to fix the world or something like that. Right. Like, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? You might be starting companies where you don't need to start a company. So, I think like the idea of grounding it to concretize this idea of being an entrepreneur around specific problems, and a company being the best way to address that problem, to create value, is a better way to think about it. I'm a little, and I'm part of the Sioka Center for Principled Entrepreneurship, right? So I do believe that you can teach certain skill sets and a certain spirit and mindset fully, okay? But there is something a little bit funny about like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an entrepreneur. Well, what does that mean? And it means I want to like be like Elon Musk or something, or Jeff Bezos or something like that. And it's never very well defined. And I think that can cause people some disillusionment if they take that far enough, if that makes sense.
And it is. They're sort of combining some self-actualization. It's not just be like, but it's like realize myself and And the way we do that is by capitalism.
Right.
Is there such thing as the founder's mythology? Or you wrote a Substack on this based on a conversation you had with Peter Thiel. Why don't you unpack that?
Yeah. So, the founder's mythology in mimetic theory, Girard sort of, dispels the idea that there's such a thing as founders, actually. We have many like founding myths in our culture, like Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. And, mimetic desire is this idea like we're not like we're born into this social structure. I mean, I don't know if I've necessarily like found anything on my own at all. And I find that a lot of entrepreneurs like romanticize the founder's journey. I mean, I think that the word founder is a little bit funny. Peter and I talked about this a little bit. It's this idea that like, I saw this problem in the world and, I objectively like sifted the data and saw this opportunity and went for it. Right. And built this company and found these people. So it's kind of this like hyper rationalistic explanation of like the founding journey. And I think if you get underneath like the story, I mean, I don't know any startup whose like founding mythology or founding story is actually the one that I hear, like if we have beers together or something like that, and we talk and I kind of like learn a little bit more about like what was driving the person in the beginning, and you kind of get on, you see the dark underbelly, and you learn about some of the real trials, and you get under kind of some of like the hagiography that we can have about some entrepreneurs. Like there's a lot of well entrepreneurs. They just have a life that's very different than the one that is portrayed in the media and in the public. So I think there's a lot of mythology around founders, and we go down a huge rabbit hole we probably don't have time for. Right? Actually, I don't have time to do it because I'll be in trouble with my fiance if I don't make it. But in mimetic theory, though, there's a lot written on founding mythology, and in mimetic theory, the idea of founding myths always covers up some kind of original violence, right? So our mythology, and I think there is a lot of startup mythology. I'm not saying that every company has a mythology, but there's a lot of startup mythology. It's usually to cover up things that we don't want people to know. So I'll leave it at that, risk of going into a tangent.
You mentioned Max Scheler. I believe he wrote a book on resentment. And I know you've studied Nietzsche quite a bit, and my understanding of Nietzsche is that you think he was right on resentment, but didn't fully appreciate sort of the difference between the internal and external mediation. Can you unpack that idea, but then also maybe start with why, what the core contribution of like why resentment is such a core, like feeling to humans?
Yeah, so resentment is such a core feeling to humans in the Girardian kind of view. Because it's resentment that often drives mimetic desire. Like resentment is why people like pick a certain model in the first place, because they believe this person has some quality of being that they lack. I mean, at the end of the day, the only reason that we would ever choose a model to imitate is because, I mean, if you think about it, why would we choose a model if we think that model is like inferior to us in some respect? Okay, in whatever like domain of life, we only choose models that we think like have something that we don't have. Some like quality of being, whether that's like the way that they're a father or, the way that they're an entrepreneur. Like a lot of like unicorn entrepreneurs sort of like occupy that status, right? It's almost like they're like cut from a different cloth. They like have some like being, that's just different. I think a lot of younger entrepreneurs think like that. And so we choose models very often through resentment. Like we resent that, like, they have something that we don't have. And that's why we imitate them. So, resentment, very closely related to envy. One of my favorite quotes by Girard, he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, like the reason that we all talk about sex so much is because nobody wants to talk about their envy. Like, sex is cool to talk about, especially in college, but envy is not. Like, who wants to talk about the fact that they're envious of somebody else? Nobody. You never hear anybody talk about that. So, envy is kind of this, the form in which mimetic desire and mimetic rivalry manifests itself the most. So it's the form that mimetic desire and rivalry often takes. Man, this podcast is a lot darker than I thought. Well, I guess we had to go here. This is good. This is really good. So Nietzsche and Hsieh, Nietzsche's brilliant. He's one of Girard's favorite philosophers, right? And identified resentment as really like driving a large part of culture, and he really sort of like hated Christianity, for overturning kind of like the hierarchy and making the victims sort of like known and loved and protected. As you know, like his theory of will to power is the complete opposite of this, right? And just said, like if you're all these Christians, right, they just like resent the people with the power and the money, and like it's just the resentment that's driving everything that they do. And in some cases, you might be right. I mean, I know plenty of Christians that are driven by certain forms of resentment, or people that are poor, or people that that just don't have what another person has. But resentment is it's kind of like the mistake of Freud, right? Where like you identify like this one thing, like repressed sexual desire, and like try to use it to explain absolutely everything. Where what Girard saw is, you can't do that with resentment either, right? Just because somebody wants something that another person has doesn't necessarily mean that they resent that person. I would actually challenge the sour grapes, like the Aesop sour grapes. I do not think that that's necessarily always the case. I disagree with Taleb a little bit on that point. But I forget your original question, Erik. I think it was something about taking this back to Girard.
And what Nietzsche understood and what he didn't about like he was right about resentment, but didn't get the difference between.
He didn't understand internal mediation, right? So he didn't make that distinction that I'm really glad we had a chance to make at the very beginning of the podcast. Because Nietzsche himself was ridiculously like resentful of like Wagner. Right, like totally like worshipped him. He was an idol to him, and in a way, like Wagner was a bit of an external mediator, and then it was sort of always an external mediator. So Hsieh and Nietzsche, like neither one of them really made this distinction between external mediators and internal, and it's the internal mediators where resentment is really nasty. So it's not just kind of the Marxist like class warfare. That's more of an external mediation thing. It's the internal mediators, the Freshmanistan, where you really have to worry about resentment the most. And I think that's where mimetic theory can bring a lot to the table when we start talking about things like class and diversity, equality, all of these things. Mimetic theory, I think, is really the key to unlock some of the more nuanced discussions we need to be having about those things.
We just have 4 minutes, so I want to end on the last two questions, and I'll let you, spend as much time as you want on each. The first one is, how do we avoid this getting scapegoated? How do you avoid the scapegoat mechanism, or when it is coming for you, sort of bounce back from it? That's sort of one question. Second question, and this sort of comes full circle in how you start the book, which is talking about sort of the ecosystem that Tony Hsieh, rest in peace, built in Las Vegas, and why, while it had some amazing things about it, it also had some unique challenges that relate to some of the ideas we've been talking about. So I'll put those two questions out for you and let you take it from here.
Yeah. So the first, I'm going to focus on the second question because if I could answer the first question, I'd be like a billionaire. I really don't know how you can avoid being a scapegoat. I mean, unless you just become a hermit or something. If I had the answer to that first question, I'd be able to like solve cancel culture on this podcast. You know what I'm saying? Like I really don't know. It's funny that I do notice people like really they sort of like intuitively like know how the scapegoat mechanism works, even if they can't articulate it in Girardian terms. And like everybody's like very careful not to stand out. Like nobody wants to stand out, for fear of being noticed and being singled out, right? On social media, it's like everybody's kind of like scared. It's better to say nothing, right? And then, as you know, like saying nothing, people like read into that too. So, man, I have no idea. For the second question, Tony Hsieh, rest in peace. I mean, Tony Hsieh and I had a close relationship for a while. 2008 was the height of that, and I think he's an incredible entrepreneur. And special and what he built, the culture that he built. I was lucky to be a part of it. It also taught me a lot about mimetic desire. That was right around the time when I was really learning about it, and becoming aware of it. And I saw it existentially kind of in the Downtown Project and in Zappos itself, especially with the adoption of holacracy. I think that kind of, brought everybody into Freshmanistan real quick. I think it made everybody an internal mediator to everybody else, and exacerbated some of the problems, right? One of my favorite books is The Underground Man by Dostoevsky. It's kind of like the first modern novel, and the way that I would describe what happened there, and there were a few suicides, unfortunately, and a lot of unhappy people. I think that desire went into the underground. I think it was kind of like the underground man, and everybody had to paint a happy face, and their mimetic desires, their mimetic rivalries, and a lot of those things went underground. That's all in chapter 3 of the book. So I hope your listeners consider, if they enjoyed this, it's a long book. There's a lot in there. I talk a little bit about my relationship with Tony, and in my read on what went on down there, I think it's a different read than you'll find anywhere else. It's kind of like the mimetic lens of what happened in downtown Vegas, and it's just my view of things as a Girardian.
That's a great place to wrap. Luke, this has been a great episode. The book is Wanting. I highly recommend it. Go check it out on Amazon. Correct, Luke?
Amazon, bookshop.org, wherever you like to buy your books from. Yep.
Awesome. It's an excellent book. I was lucky to read it. I think you'll enjoy it too if you enjoyed listening to this conversation. Luke, any other plugs or where people can find you?
I have a mimesis and culture club on Clubhouse. If you're on Clubhouse yet, so if you're on the app, give me a follow. I'll just give you an invite. We're going to try to start holding weekly rooms. And Erik, I'll probably see you around on there one of these days, maybe even tonight.
Yeah, perfect. I look forward to joining. Luke, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and excited for more of the world to be exposed to these ideas via your book.
Thanks so much, Erik. It's been great.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.